for Economic Democracy and Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. Good to have you all on. We'll get started in a couple minutes.
Is everyone there?
Yes. Hi. Welcome to the call. We appreciate y'all being punctual. We're going to get started in a few minutes. And while we're waiting, if you could share your name, city, and organization in the chat box so we can see everyone who's participating today. And the name of this call, just to make sure you're on the right call, is Renter Nation Series Episode 1, Building a Rebel City, Struggle for Economic Democracy and Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. We'll get started in a couple minutes.
Hey, Rukia, can you chat me your cell phone number? And Mark, that looked great, just what you did a minute ago.
Hi, everyone. This is Tony Romano with Right to the City. Good to have you on the call. If you haven't already, please share your name, city, and organization in the chat box so we can see who's participating. And the call you're on tonight is our first episode of the Renter Nation series this year, entitled Building a Rebel City, the Struggle for Economic Democracy and Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. We're going to start reviewing some technology issues and questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark Sweet.
First, everybody go in the room and get in the bed if you want me to read.
Hey, all. Can you hear me, John? Are we good? Cool. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to go through a couple of tech tips for using this fine Zoom platform. My name is Mark Swear. I'm with Right to the City Alliance. So for starters, we encourage everyone to use your phone for audio and computer for video. You can call in at 646-586-58, just in case folks who are on the phone at the video light up. Phone number 646-558-8658 and 151-7911. This way, in case you knocked off from internet connection or network, just stay on the phone with us. Headset for best audio and clearest.
Hey, Mark, we're actually losing a little bit of your audio connection. It's cutting in and out. So I want to make sure folks hear this. I'm not sure why it's cutting it out. Can folks give me a thumbs up if you can hear my voice loud and clear? Okay, great. Sorry, Mark, I just want to make sure folks hear that. So Mark was just reading out the code for calling in. It is on the screen, although we did realize that the call-in code, it's actually in the chat box, and it's 925-702-2846. Again, that's 925-702-2846 is the code. We are going to ask folks to stay on mute during the presentation in the earlier part of the calls, and to use the chat box throughout the call to ask questions, to chime in, to encourage dialogue, and also encourage folks to tweet about the episode at Cooperation JXN, at Our City, at HFA_Renner and the last thing we'll note is that unfortunately we were not able to line up interpretation for this call, but we do want to note that for all of the additional calls as part of the Renner Nation series, we will have interpretation, and we do apologize for not having that for this first call. But we want to let folks know, and we'll talk more about the upcoming calls. So Mark, sorry about cutting you off. I wanted to make sure that that got heard loud and clear. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tony.
New slide.
Next slide.
Tony, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So I'd like to review the agenda for the call. It is an hour-and-a-half call. And if we could back the slide up one slide. Great. So for the agenda, first, I'm going to give a quick introduction to Homes for All and the purpose of our Renter Nation series, of which this is episode 1. Then we're going to have what we've all been waiting for, the panel discussion with Rochelle LaForce moderating, Sacajawea Hall and Rukia Lumumba, Saki from Coop Jackson and Rukia from MXGM of Jackson. They will be our presenters and they will share. Then we'll open it up for group discussion and questions. And then we'll talk about specifically what support is needed to support the struggle in Jackson, Mississippi, and then we'll talk about what's next. So now for a quick introduction of Homes for All. Homes for All is a grassroots-led translocal campaign fighting to win housing as a human right for all people. The campaign was launched in 2013 by Right to the City, through a series of retreats with the Right to the City Land and Housing Work Group. The purpose was to build a popular and intersectional movement for housing justice. Since its inception with 17 organizations, Homes for All has grown to 66 partner organizations in 38 cities and 24 states. We seek to move 3 translocal tracks of work, the first one being renters' rights and tenant union organizing. Second, creating and organizing for community control of land through community land trust. And third, fighting for development without displacement. We have 4 core principles at Homes for All that guide our work. Principle number 1 is that community, land, and housing are human rights, not commodities to be exploited for profit. Principle number 2 is land and housing should be collectively owned and controlled by communities. Principle number 3, land and housing should be developed in a way that is sustainable for the planet. And principle number 4, we can't win Homes for All without racial, gender, and economic justice. Our movement for Homes for All must be intersectional and cross-sector. So now for the purpose of the Renter Nation series and why we're rolling out the series. First, we seek to amplify local strategies working to build municipal power to take back our cities and win a transition to a community-controlled economy that works for the people and planet. Second, we seek to build connections, relationships, and shared analysis between the housing justice movement and other movements. Third, the series seeks to deepen our collective capacity to build intersectional, multi-issue movements to win and build the strategy and the power to win what we need. Fourth, we seek to share powerful examples of local and regional cross-sector movement building. Homes for All and Right to the City know that we can't win housing justice unless we transform our social and economic systems and unless we win racial, gender, and economic justice for all. Building the power of the Renter Nation must be part of a broader strategy for building power to bring about a just transition to a world that is truly for people and planet over profit, hate, and bigotry. This year's Renter Nation series is working to facilitate the political education and analysis building of folks within and outside the housing justice movement in order to deepen our collective capacity to build intersectional multi-issue movements to build the strategy and power we need to win. So with that, y'all, we appreciate y'all hearing some of the background of who we are. With that, I want to turn it over to our esteemed moderator, Rochelle LaForest, who is currently the Right to the City Alliance Steering Committee member, one of a few steering committee members. So I will turn it over to Rochelle to get the panel rolling.
Thank you, Tony. Hey, everyone. Oh, my Lord, how do you have my picture up there? Okay, let me not slip up. Let me stay focused. This is Rochelle LaForest, formerly the Executive Director of Right to the City Alliance, currently a seated steering committee member, and loving all of the work that's been developing. And I will be moderating the panel conversation, the webinar for today. And so before we dig in on giving some background context to this whole series, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of the Renter Nation series for 2017 in general, and why this has been developed and is rolling out in different cities. So Homes for All and Right to the City, as an organization and as a campaign, we are very clear that housing justice is not winnable unless we are actually transforming the social and economic systems that oppress us, and unless we're winning racial, gender, and economic justice for everyone. And so building the power of the Renter Nation, building the power of renters all throughout the country have to be part of a broader strategy for building power that brings about a just transition in a world where the people and the planet come at the are sacrificed for the purposes of bringing in profit every single day, that they're sacrificed for being able to promote hate and bigotry every single day. And so our struggle around renter justice and struggle to grow the renter nation is one that is intrinsically connected to a larger fight against profit, against hate, against bigotry. So this year, the Renter Nation series is working hard to facilitate a series of political education and analysis conversations, building with folks inside and outside of the housing justice movement that really begins to deepen our collective capacity for intersectional multi-issue movements, right? I am a renter, yes, I'm also a woman, I'm a person of color, I am queer. We have lots of different identities and spaces where oppression is moving through our lives on a regular basis. And we want to ensure that our issues are intersectional and that we're actually building the power we need to win. So throughout the series, we'll be hosting cross-movement discussions, uplifting and amplifying examples of local and regional cross-sector movement building, and amplifying local strategies, not just the national ones that tend to get a lot of shine, but some of the most innovative and incredible models exist at the local level, and we want to amplify those local strategies where people are working to build municipal power that has now become the optimal buzzword, and take back our cities to win a transition for community-controlled, not only housing, but an economy and a country that works for people and planet. So with that, I want to head into some framing around why we believe that rebel cities and building municipal power is a strategy that's needed right now. First off, sorry, I hit the mute. First off, anyone familiar with Right to the City's work from the early days knows that the municipal strategy, or cities and localities being at the core of a power building strategy, has been in our DNA and part of our mantra since day one. This is not a new strategy or direction for Right to the City or the Homes for All campaign. It just happens to be one that's gained a great deal of popularity now. So pre-Trump, or 45, I hate to say his name, and post-Trump, we're clear that the need for a translocal strategy that transforms relations of power, confronts capital, and wins rights locally, and wins community control of local resources and local elected officials is what helps us win at not only the local level, but at the national level and the global level. What's challenging now, and what's great about this rebel cities framing, is that some of the language that's been introduced in the wake of 45, AKA Trump, has been around sanctuary. And for us, we believe very strongly that sanctuary cities, sanctuary institutions, sanctuary states, the United States as a sanctuary period, is vital in order to ensure the protection of those that are at the forefront of this kind of oppression. But sanctuary is not enough. And it connotates a defenselessness almost, a need to be protected as opposed to building power and actually building strength. And that's what's different about rebel cities and being ungovernable and building power versus sanctuary cities and looking for protection. Both of them are necessary, but it seems in the national discourse that we are really losing sight of the power building aspect of it, and a lot of the resources from foundations and a lot of the resources from larger institutions and a lot of the discourse is centering around sanctuary alone. And so we want to expand that and talk about what power building in our municipalities has to look like in order for us to beat back the policies and the politics that are coming out of the federal government and locally from within our communities. So I want to be able to introduce our panelists for today. Man, I have something blocking my view from the, okay, here we go. I want to be able to introduce our panelists today. We have Sacajawea Hall, who is on the webinar with us from Cooperation Jackson. And we have her partner, Rukia Lumumba, both of whom are going to talk about community control and building municipal power in Jackson, Mississippi. I think, Saki, you have 15 minutes, so I'm gonna hand the telephone or the mic over to you. Immediately following you, it will be Rukia's turn, and what I wanna do is invite people to use the chat function to be able to share with us any questions that you might have, any thoughts and things that are coming up throughout the course of their presentations, so that we can have less of a formal Q&A and sort of keep this non-static and really be able to get questions that are right from you while the juices are flowing, and be able to have a dialogue towards the end that's a little bit more natural and free-flowing. So without that, Saki, I'm gonna hand it over to you, and thanks everyone for being with us. Saki, are you on? I thought I started to hear something earlier. Okay, it's possible that Saki's having technical difficulties, so perhaps we'll let Rukia step in. Oh.
No, Mark, she's on. Can you unmute Saki?
Oh, we need Saki unmuted.
Saki, check if your phone is muted.
You want me to try my phone again?
There you go.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying, if you heard my mouth moving and you couldn't hear me talking, was that Rukia and I switched it up a little bit. We're actually gonna do a combined, kind of going back and forth as we flip through the slides that we have prepared for tonight. And so instead of me taking 15 minutes and Rukia taking 15 minutes, we'll both share what's happening here in Jackson on the ground for the full 30 minutes. And so I definitely want to say I'm excited to be on this webinar. I love, absolutely love Right to the City Home for All webinars. We usually keep it really live. I don't know if that's going to be possible as much on this call tonight, but Cooperation Jackson is a member of Right to the City and the Homes for All campaign. We are a part of the Our Homes, Our Land, which is really focused around the alternative building of community land trusts in terms of housing, and our proactive claim to own and control our land and our housing. And so very briefly, I'm one of the co-founding members of Cooperation Jackson. I'm a member of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. And I want Rukia to be able to introduce herself briefly before we start flipping through the slides.
Hey everybody, this is Rukia Lumumba. Sorry you can't see me. I'm having technical difficulties. My camera is on, but it won't show me. So I'm sorry. So I'm Rukia Lumumba. I like to start by saying that I'm the daughter of Sacajawea Lumumba and Nubia Lumumba, because I like to just call them into every space that we're speaking, especially when we're talking about the right to what we consider free the land, the right to make sure that everyone has the human right to land and access and housing. And so I am here in Jackson, Mississippi. I am a member of Cooperation Jackson as well as the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. I will do short really quickly. Saki and I both are transplants to Mississippi. I consider myself from Mississippi because I have lived here for many years prior to doing a short trip away and living away for a couple of years. But I was raised primarily in Mississippi because my father in the late 1980s had a vision of really creating a free space, a new type of government in Mississippi, and that brought us here. And so we're here to continue that work, that vision, to create a more human rights-based city, state, and government. And so that's what brings me here. See you, Saki.
Yeah, and so another one of our heroes and freedom fighters you see on the screen Fannie Lou Hamer, and we just wanted to really start off with the spirit of Fannie Lou, Medgar Evers, Baba Chokwe, Lumumba, Mama Nubia Lumumba, and look at this quote from Fannie Lou Hamer saying that self-determination is the process by which a person controls their own life. My control over the slideshow is a little slow, but so we want to start off. We've been talking about Cooperation Jackson a lot, but we want to start off with how Cooperation Jackson even was born. And we want to start off talking about the Jackson Kush-Plan. And so the Jackson Kush-Plan and links to the document were sent out with all of the promotional materials for this episode 1, for this call. We hope that some of you have been able to read it. If you weren't able to read it and it's your first time hearing of it, we really hope that you can go online and read it, because it really is an important document. And like Rukia mentioned, this was a reiteration of plans and strategies that have been in the making for a really long time, that brought her father here, that brought me here, and that brought her back home. And so the Jackson Kush-Plan was developed by the New African Peoples Organization and the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. And the plan really focuses on building strong social movements in 3 areas. Last year, we actually, when I say we, I mean Cooperation Jackson and the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement actually did a call solely focused on people's assemblies and participatory democracy. Malcolm or Mark, can you go to the next slide for me? It doesn't seem like it's moving. And on this call, the people's assemblies, on this call, we're going to be focused on the solidarity economy and the independent politics, like Rochelle was emphasizing, the municipal level and the power building that has been and needs to continue being developed on the city level. And so those are like the strong 3-pronged strategies within the Jackson Kush-Plan, and we're going to be focusing on those 2, with Rukia focusing on her experience and her family's experience within building engaging in the electoral politics, and then with Cooperation Jackson as a vehicle for the economic democracy and building a solidarity economy. I need the slides to change.
Go to the next slide.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry.
I think I got it. Mine is,
Okay.
I'm going faster than the slide actually goes. So, it'll catch up to me, or I'll catch up to it. So just to share a little bit, the Cooperation Jackson, we see ourselves as an emerging vehicle for economic democracy, sustainable community development, and community ownership control. Our broad mission is to advance the development of economic democracy here in Jackson, Mississippi. And by that, we mean being able to have control over the different means of production, everywhere from empowering workers to distributors to suppliers to consumers, and really being able to have those things be democratically run and managed by the community, by the workers who are the owners. And through this, we're talking about building a solidarity economy. And for us, we really see that being anchored by a network of cooperatives, and not only like cooperatives and worker owner cooperatives, but other forms of democratically self-managed businesses. We are soon, coming up in May, going to be 3 years old. We launched in the spring of 2014, right during the week of May Day and right before we held the Jackson Rising New Economies Conference. And so we really, our work actually, aside from, in addition to the cooperative development and the solidarity economy and really anchoring that in cooperative institutions, we also really know how important it is to have a holistic view and how everything connects. And so the other part of our work is really in both creating institutions and supporting collaborative creation within coalitions of institutions as a part of really being able to meet the needs and build a culture and build institutions that can hold and can ground the work that we're developing and that we envision. And so we really see and believe that we can replace this extractive economy with an economy that is for the people, for the people and the planet, with a proven democratic alternative, and one that is really based on all the things that Rochelle opened us up with earlier and previously: ownership, control, building power at the local level, finding ways to have businesses run in sustainable ways, having that the ecology and the culture and the life of a community be able to withstand the pressures of displacement and gentrification. Let me see.
Hey, Saki, I'm sorry. One quick thing. Is it possible to make the screen a little bigger? Because it's hard to read the slides. Is that just me? Can somebody put their hand up if they agree? Thumb up.
Does that make it better?
No.
Rukia, you know, you may, if you close out the visuals and are not able to see people's faces, like if you shut that down, you will be able to see, I think, the full screen then.
Thank you.
No worries.
Okay. So, Rukia,
Yeah.
can you share a little bit about just like the historical context of Mississippi and where we are? I know one of the things that we have and we like to say and that we've been saying is like what people are experiencing and kind of the shock of Trump is something that Mississippi has been dealing with from the very beginning. And so maybe we can share the next couple of slides in terms of the historical context that we're living in here in Mississippi.
Yeah, definitely. So, as many of you may know, I've heard, Mississippi has a long history of being one of the worst in a number of ways, right? Currently, we're considered the worst state for health reasons. We're considered the worst state for political reasons, right? We have we're considered a red state. We have a history of being the most racist state. There was a history of violence that in Mississippi that was said to be greater than any violence that people had experienced throughout the nation. The number of lynchings, the number of the just torture and a number of other things. The other facts that people tend to not know about Mississippi is that historically Mississippi has had one of the highest percentages of Black people in one state, concentrated place. Historically, Mississippi has maintained at least 40% of its population has been Black. Currently, it still stands as a state that at least approximately about 40%, more than 40%, actually a little more than 40%, still remains Black. And when I say Black, it's not Black concentrated in just one city. It has a history and currently still has a state that has the largest percentages of Black counties. And that's important because it allows us to realize and was the root cause of why my father and people before him, like Mario Bedelli and people who from the Republic of New Africa, who really were just trying to identify states where they could actually realize and actualize places where they could create a safer place for their families to live, to be, to create better government, chose Mississippi because there were more Black counties, meaning there was more opportunity to own and to have control over the places that they owned and resided. And so that is why we are here in Mississippi. Mississippi still maintains a high population of Black people. The capital of Mississippi is Jackson, Mississippi. And Jackson, Mississippi is in the center of the state, and it has the highest percentage of Black people within its area. Jackson, Mississippi is 85% Black. And since the early 1990s, was able to have its first Black mayor, and since then has maintained the Black mayor. That's important because Jackson is an economic base for the state. However, over the past about 15 years, there have been economic and demographic shifts that have left Jackson with a declining tax base. As soon as Jackson in the early 1990s began to have Black controlled government, there was an extreme white flight. White people began to leave the city at record rates. And they didn't leave the city and leave their property or sell their property. Most of them left the city, got new property elsewhere, and maintained the property that they still had in Jackson. As a result, they maintained their jobs in Jackson. So as a result, their new home cities began to benefit from their tax dollars, while Jackson began to just consistently be drained of its resources. People just coming in to use, the roads, to take all the jobs, to keep land that they had and not upkeep the land, right? So we have a lot of dilapidated homes, as you can see. We also have chronic and unemployment, as many states around the nation does. And this is a lot due to many different reasons. But one reason, Mississippi has had historically a really egregious practice as it comes to the criminalization of Black people historically, and that also really impacts that. Currently, the city is said to have poor performing schools. The infrastructure of the city is in decay, from the pipes to the roads. You can't drive down a road in Mississippi without hitting a pothole, right? And this has all led to the people of Mississippi the people of Jackson, I keep saying Mississippi side, the people of Jackson really feeling a significant lack of hope around city government, and really feeling a sense of just disarray, right, in terms of what are we going to do next. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
So it is for all of these reasons that in 2008, my father, after pressure from his comrades in the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, decided to run for city council. We knew that we could no longer just sit idly by and allow untrained, uninformed, unexperienced people continue to run the city and not offer any additional support and guidance, and really offer more voice from the people themselves. So we created a people's platform, right, where we really used the people's assemblies that we had developed after Hurricane Katrina, where we had brought people together to share and express what the problems were and what some of the solutions were in terms of rebuilding our cities. And so we used that same process to develop the People's Platform. The People's Platform was a platform truly informed by the people, indicating what the people felt were the most urgent needs of the city of Jackson, and some solutions in how they believe that we could achieve the rebuilding of our decaying city. So in 2008, my father won if we could just go back to the previous slide. So in 2008, my father, Sacajawea Lumumba, ran for city council and won. He ran for city council in Ward 2, which was one of the largest wards in the city, and won. He then later ran for, after the success of the 2008 and the support he received from Ward 2 residents and from citizens all around Jackson, really was pushed again by his comrades to consider running for mayor. And so in 2014, after much conversation with us as a family, as a community, as as an organization, in 2014, we felt it necessary for him to run for mayor. We felt it necessary for him to run for mayor because we really believed that it was time for the people to take control of their city, and that we could no longer just, again, stand by. And being in city council did not equate to enough control over budget, over ability to be innovative around how we allow for a more shared economy and democracy. And so in 2014, running on a people's platform again, he was elected mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, unanimously by 85% vote. 7 months into his office, he passed away unexpectedly of an aneurysm. And that left people really shocked, one, because one thing I didn't say is that during the 7 months he was in office, there was a restored hope. The city was in a space that it hadn't been in for over 15 years. People were excited. Black people, white people, everybody was excited about the possibilities that he was creating. There was now conversation about cooperatives and cooperatives growing with the help of, his administration, people in the administration. People's assemblies were happening and people had a voice. He shared budget information with citizens. It was the first time in the history of the city that citizens actually had an opportunity to vote on legislation, had an opportunity to vote on policy and legislation in terms of, for example, the 1% sales tax, in which he asked to help secure funding for the falling infrastructure of our water system. He asked the citizens of Jackson, if they wanted to tax themselves. There was a 1% sales tax created. And the citizens of Jackson, after much, dialogue and understanding, voted to tax themselves. 90% of citizens of Jackson decided to tax themselves so that together the citizens in the city could repair the crumbling water system that was happening, that we are still suffering from in the city of Jackson. So he engaged in more of a people-centered approach to governing, and people felt that, and people appreciated the ability to participate in that. So after his passing, my younger brother, during a special election, my younger brother, Sacajawea Lumumba, then stepped up to take the bold step to take my father's seat, to continue that vision, to continue the vision that my father and his comrades had laid out of creating a more just city. And unfortunately, he did not win that election. It was an election of only a 2-month campaigning process. And though he had 65% of the Black vote, there was a record high white voting percentage that came out during that special election, and unfortunately he lost. Which leads us, I think if we can go to the next slide now.
There's a delay when I flip to the slide, but it is coming. And and so go ahead, Rukia.
No problem. Yeah, so my brother Sacajawea Lumumba then took the ban help and began to run. He did not win. But what we said was that if the people felt it was necessary for him to run again in the next mayoral election, then we would make sure that we were there and that we made sure that that campaign happened. And so after a period of 3 years, the people of Mississippi consistently, over and over again, said, he needs to run for mayor. We want him as mayor. During that 3-year period that after my father's passing, the city experienced even more problems. There have been significant attempts of a city takeover. In terms of the state trying to take over the city, the first effort, or one of the first efforts, was the city trying to take over the airport. And Saki's going to go into more depth about all of this in a little bit. The city has more recently just initiated legislation to take control over the infrastructure. The state is now trying to take control from Jackson and Jackson residents, the control over how to fix the infrastructure and the resources that come with the infrastructure in general. Jackson is one of the spaces that provides water to neighboring cities and counties. When the state comes in and takes over those resources, it then takes money from the mouths of Jackson residents as well, right? And so those are some of the things Saki's going to get into next.
Yeah, and so we have a little bit of a time check, so I'm going to go through some of these slides pretty quickly, but the important, there's like so much of what was happening before that Rukia described is continuing and continues at a heightened level, and so it's blaming the victim for why you have to continue extracting resources through their labor and through their taxes, right? And so because the infrastructure is in decline and because the city has no resources, there's been attack after attack on trying to have the state take over the public school system. That's coming down the pipeline. There's been the water decree, consent decree potentially threatening and looming from the EPA. We just got word on the bill that we've been fighting since last year, where it's called the Downtown Capital Complex Annexation. Please go to our Facebook page. I'm not even going to try to show you my screen right now, even though I would love to, because this map that you see in front of you is one part that shows all the different development plans that have been coming down the pipeline for a while. If you look, there's a circle that says One Lake. They want to create there's like the One Lake, there's the medical corridor, and really all of it is about being able to take the capital, the city of Jackson, back in a lot of ways, right? And so they're willing to flood areas with water to have lakefront property and casinos. They're willing to take the Jackson State Stadium and completely wipe out and clear out a whole neighborhood and battlefield next to the JSU. Apparently there's been this annexation bill that's passed today, which is really underneath the guise of being able to support Jackson's infrastructure through Jackson taxes by expanding the level and the land owned by the state, who does not pay taxes and who does not pay for water. And so under the guise of helping Jackson's infrastructure by being able to have the state take over more land and provide revenue, it's a complete takeover of the parts of the city that they deem very valuable. And so we're really, up against, and I want to go back to this slide, because not too far from the area where we're in at the Sacajawea Lumumba Center for Economic Democracy and Development are these pretty, you can't see the pointing, are these pretty houses that have gone through 4 different phases. All of them pretty much are empty, but it's an image that's very, I think, telling, especially for a lot of you who are in different parts of the city where this has happened, right? Like Jackson is on the brink of what so many other places have seen happen. And so we're really hoping to continue, despite all of the attacks, in doing what we have been working on effortlessly when we started Cooperation Jackson and really the development of the work that's been going on for decades in our communities based on our ancestors. And so this visual really helps you to see the idea of fighting and building. And so we're talking about what we're doing already is this 4-pronged green worker community cooperative. We have the community production cooperative and the center that I'll show some pictures in development. We're able to soon have the paperwork done and complete to acquire a building right across the street from the Lumumba Center where we are now. We have the Eco Village and the Just Transition Education, the Human Rights Institution. So like I was saying earlier, it's about being able to create the supporting institutions that are connected and interrelated, along with the solidarity economy and the worker cooperatives that we're building in order to realize economic democracy. And so we have been pushing, regardless of who is in office, and we understood that we had a very unique experience with being able to have, you know, the late Mayor Sacajawea Lumumba in office, where we could realize the parts that you see on the right side, which is the kind of city that we want to see and the kind of policies and programs that we want, that we are pushing for to be implemented. We have another opportunity, you know, potentially to have a favorable administration so that we can really dig deep on that municipal level where our communities feel it the most. And so I'm going to skip through this a little bit faster, but this kind of shows you both how we're talking about pushing it on the municipal level and how we're also already doing that proactive work around these 4 areas. We're going to go on. And so one of our major initiatives, the Sustainable Community Initiative, I'm looking to see. Can you give me a time check? Can somebody tell me how much more time we have?
You've got about 4 more minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Or 5.
So, okay. So the Sustainable Communities Initiative, this is kind of just like a visual of it, and this was an earlier slide, and I was really getting excited as I kind of started working on this presentation and looking at just kind of like where we were a year ago or 2 years ago and where we are now. And so we have established and been working on a community land trust. And so the idea is that that community land trust is like the bedrock of the Eco Village, and the Eco Village encompasses all these different worker cooperatives, right? And that the worker cooperatives are interrelated and interdependent. And so Nubia's Place, I'll have photos of. We haven't opened the cafe in the Lumumba Center yet, but we've been doing the catering, and the catering has been able to use the produce grown from Freedom Farms, and the composting that happens of that food can circle back around to feed the produce that then again is used in the cafe and the catering. And that's just one example, right? And so there's another visual, because it's really hard to kind of paint the picture or diagram this web of how so many things are connected. But see here again with the Sustainable Communities Initiative, we have the urban farming, the composting, you know, a variation of different worker cooperatives, the community land trust. You know, we're already talking about and thinking about and looking at all the different ways, both in the United States and internationally. People are doing things like alternative currency. People are doing things like time banking. We have this just transition policy. We're a part of the Climate Justice Alliance and have been doing that work because we realize how integral that is for not, you know, not just the planet when people think about it as environmental justice, but like for us, right, for our livelihoods. And next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna go through this as a way to kind of give you a glimpse and a view at the different projects and pieces and initiatives that we have, and then hopefully as we're going about in the conversation, I can give a little bit more details, and then we're hoping that you definitely continue to follow, be in touch, and learn more about some of the newest, really exciting things. And so if you see at the top, this is the Carey's Learning Center, which is a child care center piece of property that we were able to acquire. And, you know, months later, even though we started in it and with different rounds of construction and renovations, we have the Lumumba Center for Economic Democracy and Development, Nubia's Place, and you heard Rukia talk about her mother, Rukia Lumumba, and how, you know, she didn't get to talk that much about the huge role that she played here in Jackson, and we're really excited to be able to uplift Nubia and Sacajawea in the same space by having the center be the host to Nubia's Place Cafe. And so this is a picture of one of our worker owners doing the catering. The top picture is solar. We went solar I'm not sure how many months ago it was, towards the end of the year. It was really, really exciting. I haven't gone up on the roof yet, but so we'll be keeping everybody kind of like up to date to say, like, what does that actually mean? What does that mean for the energy that we're able to save and produce on our own? And as we look towards like energy and democracy. So Freedom Farms has come a long way. This plot is in the back of the Lumumba Center. We didn't even realize that it was there and how big it was when we got here. It was like a play area. And then you can see at the bottom, there's different like phases of transformation. And we've been able to have 2 different growing seasons. And now the planning is happening around expanding past this plot in the back, which is really focused on providing produce for the cafe for Nubia's place, into other plots and lands that we have been able to acquire. And so one of the newest initiatives, and it's hard to say new because that picture in the back where it looks like we're in the forest is actually the same block where it looks like they're just raking leaves. And that's this Ewing Street where we have a number of parcels, a number of property, vacant land, one place with an abandoned home on a like 1 block radius. And so that is the pilot, the start of our eco-village, where we're really gonna be focusing on building up towards being able to do housing and build housing, but still being able to make productive use of the land through urban farming, through creating outdoor community spaces. And so one of the newer co-ops also that's been developing and had to shift and shape a little bit, that's looking at like waste management and composting and landscaping, is the Green Team. Where's it going? So this is a picture of the building that's directly across the street from us. It's actually like 4 different buildings, and it's soon to be the Amari Obadele Center for Community Production. We had 3 interns up in Detroit for, I think they were up there for like 4 or 5 months, learning digital fabrication, design, using the different machines to, turn wood or plastic into this cooperation Jackson logo. And that's just one small example of how you can digitally fabricate something. And the part that's exciting to me around the housing work is the affordability around being able to digitally fabricate and create housing, right? And the important part of it that we keep talking about in terms of community production is being able to really own the means of production and have it be community-based, have it be a center where the community can come in and learn how to use this technology, say this is something that we need. We've been exploring and talking about all kinds of things. We have, people in Jackson have to pay for water, have to buy water. What does it look like if we were able to create a water filtration system? And so the stage that's really exciting now is like, how does the community production cooperative tie into all the other different cooperatives? How do they, they're going around, we're looking at some of the property and it's like, oh, a hoop house, like we could use this to make a hoop house. And so connecting the dots and kind of closing that circle so that we're able to own the means of production, being able to own the distribution. Let me see, I know I'm probably running shorter on time. It's almost, was that the last one? I think that was the last one. Yeah, okay. And so yeah, let's hear from other folks, and then
right. So, and I mean, we have a healthy chunk of time to be able to dig into a back and forth. There are a number of comments that have been popping up on the chat line. So first, I would just want to thank Saki and Rukia. It is incredible as someone who was in Jackson in, I think, 2013 to see how far things have come along. I really appreciate all the detail in the mapping and in really getting a solid understanding of what that fight has looked like. I wanted to offer a few highlights just from what you shared, and what I captured has less to do with the details of what's being built out, but more around the strategy and the approach that you all have taken on, which I think tie right back in and speak to the underpinnings of Right to the City, the Homes for All campaign, the Just Transition push, the It Takes Roots, the Climate Justice Alliance. Like, these are really some of the most solid underpinnings in how we move our strategy. So there's 4 particular things that I just want to lift up, and it'd be great to hear other people react to them and offer more questions as we move into the discussion period. So the first is that the very first thing that you shared with us is that this work is rooted in self-determination, right? So it's not about skimming off profits for a different set of folks in Jackson, Mississippi, but it is about self-determination, and in particular, Black self-determination. And there's a question tied to that that came on in early on that I'd love for us to be able to get to. Additionally, I think it's important to note the weaving of short-term reform strategies, so things that are dealing with the here and now, the current time, place, and conditions that mesh with the construction of democratic alternatives. So really looking at and building towards long-term transformation and wholesale replacement of what was and what may be getting reformed into new democratic structures. Third is what you all described as a very multifaceted approach to power building in Jackson. So not only the direct organizing, but also the political education within the community. And then really importantly, especially in this present moment and always, is the connection to electoral work, not just rallying the troops of the neighborhood around a particular candidate who may be giving good lip service to some of the issues that matter in Jackson, but actually doing your own candidate development and ultimately pushing forward a mayor who could run an administration that in fact modeled what it was that Cooperation Jackson had been talking about for years and years and years. And then finally, I just offer that both the models of what is being built out there and the approach in general is, as you described it, Saki, a web. It really is an ecosystem where each of the pieces both relies on and feeds the other. And it's a cyclical and very natural way of thinking about how our lives move, how power gets built, how our economies need to flow and function in a way that is sustainable and just for people and the planet. And it's really wonderful to see the actual physical structures and to look at the charts that show how these different pieces fit together. So I just want to offer those as some of the highlights in terms of strategy and the underpinnings of the work that you all are moving there. And I will scroll down to where we have one of our first questions that got offered in the chat box, and it really comes back to something that I raised earlier around self-determination. So the question is, how do you all incorporate other nationalities, Spanish speakers or people who come from other countries and don't necessarily identify themselves as Black in Jackson? How do you incorporate those nationalities into the solidarity economy and or the larger project for Black self-determination within that region? So how are you pulling people into that fight in that process when their identity is different than being Black and in Jackson? And just before we get to the answer, I really want to encourage folks to go ahead and include or share with us questions or comments that you have in the chat box. We will read them out. We will work to get to as many of them as possible within the time frame that we've got.
Mm-hmm. So, Saki, do you mind? Nope. You want to go?
No, go.
Okay. I mean, to answer that question, I mean, I think it's a really important question and a good question. You know, when we think about Black independent governance, we don't think of it in a way where it excludes anyone. And so I think it's important. One of the things we often say is that this day and age, we're not fighting about just the color of the person that's in government, but we're talking about the ideology of the person in government. And so it is important to us that the government that we want to see really is for and about the people that it's serving. And that group of people is a diverse group of people, right? And so understanding that it's no longer the color of the skin, but it's the ideology of the person, right? We also recognize that, you know, in all that we do, we can't exist in just a Black world, right? Our world is not Black, and neither is Jackson, Mississippi, just a Black place. And we believe and value the beauty of all of human beings. Our struggle is not for one race, it's a human race, right? We are fighting for human rights for human beings. And we say that over and over again to help people understand our desire to finally have control and investment in what the laws that are governing us, the systems that are governing us, so that we can recreate them, doesn't mean that other people can't be a part of that process and help to lead that process. It means that we have to take back the reins from other people who have held us down and oppressed us for so long in achieving that. So that means, and I'm sorry, I'm so long-winded. I'm trying to say this quickly. So that means, you know, we must, you know, if there's 85% of the city is Black, you know, we need to have more Black representation in our government. And that does not mean that we don't need to have, and we also need to make sure that we have a growing Mexican representation as our city is growing with a Mexican population. We need to have more representation of the people that are in the city, right? So that's how, Jackie, do you want to? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Rukia. I'm glad that you were able to share that and say that first. So Cooperation Jackson is a multiracial organization, and so we already have membership that spans across the different communities that are here in Jackson and in Mississippi. You can be a member if you're in the state of Mississippi, not necessarily only in Jackson. And so I wanted to add that, but it's basically what all of Rukia just said. And, you know, and I think that although we're new, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement and the forces that we come from and are a part of here in Mississippi have always been explicit and demonstrated and practiced that solidarity across the different communities and really and focusing on working class people.
Great, thank you to you both. And you know, it could probably be a whole other webinar where we really dig into what the practical pieces of that look like on a day-to-day, like how it plays out to both respect identity, but also really have intersectionalism, and what are the kinds of challenges that come up throughout the organizing work that people have developed strategies to contend with. I'm not offering that as a question for here, but just something for us to ruminate on. So folks can probably see the little comment box in the middle of your screen, and I want to put this out there to help pepper some of the comments and questions that come out. This is something that Saki and Rukia are actually offering and wanting to understand and include in this dialogue. So after hearing what you've heard about what the organizers in Jackson are doing, how could you move strategies, or are you moving strategies in your city or community that are towards the end of building independent political power or advancing efforts to build an autonomous solidarity economy to build municipal power? So where that's happening, where there are people on this call who are engaged in that work, fledgling stages, at the middle, or, you know, really embarking on a big piece of your project, be amazing to have an exchange about what that experience is in your city. A big thing that we've always said in Right to the City is time, place, conditions, right? And so what we're hearing about in Jackson can't necessarily be picked up as a whole model in and of itself and then put down in New York City. It's a different place. There are different sets of conditions. There's a different approach. Not to say that it can and shouldn't happen here. It would just take a different approach and maybe some different kinds of strategies, but we want to hear who else is out there that's building that. So while people think about what they want to offer, there is another very practical question that got offered in the comment section, which was, what was the process that you all went through to take over empty lots? So incredibly important for people who may be really excited about what they're hearing now and thinking about what's possible in their own cities, and a very, very practical first step.
So yeah, thank you. Actually, that helps to me be able to clarify how we've been able to acquire a lot of the land that we have. And so we haven't taken over any land. We haven't done any land occupations yet per se. But we're in the quote unquote cold market, right? And so there's I think the image, if people don't have an image of like what it looks like on the ground in Jackson, a lot of people have a visual image of Detroit, right, in terms of what you heard and what you've seen. And so in the area where we are focused in this part of West Jackson where the center is, there's a lot of empty vacant land. A lot of the land is owned by the state. A lot of the land is owned by the city, as well as like individual owners. And so after we were able to get the property where the Lumumba Center is and the farm, and it actually included one of the parcels that was a private owner, we acquired another, it was like 13 parcels that were state owned. And then and they're affordable, right? There's like ridiculous, like half acre could be like $1,000. And so in a lot of areas, the amount of being able to, the ability to even acquire land is not possible just based on how much it is. And here in Jackson and where we are in particular, we have the opportunity in a lot of ways because of the state owning it and putting it up for auction. And so right now, we actually last year increased by another, I think like almost 20 parcels. And so all of the land that we're able to, that we've been able to acquire through the different fundraising and the different funding sources that we have, is going into the community land trust to be owned and operated by the community.
So Rukia, unless you didn't have anything to add connected to that question, and again, it goes back to some of the context that folks will be dealing with in other cities. There was a question around whether or not you all have worked with lawyers who have expertise in land use law or zoning law or real estate law. If there's collaboration with Jackson State University's urban planning professors to fight any gentrification that seems to be, encroaching into the city now, and what experience have you had with working with any of those professionals if that's happened?
Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to say before we go into that question, I think one of the things that we're going to be thinking about if we do win this upcoming election on May 2nd is how do we use vacant homes in a way to provide free housing to folks, right? So just really looking at that as well. And so any suggestions, ideas, examples, we have been studying and we have some examples, but we would appreciate any support and help around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was around like land use and particularly housing. So we actually have a good number of relationships with a few lawyers around land. Jackson State University, Jackson State University is like our neighbor. And so we do have some good relationships there. We have only really in a limited way had to use like lawyers to help with any of the the parts that we've been, or the aspects that we've been working on so far. We actually got a lot of support from a national network when it came to creating the Community Land Trust, which was the Community Land Trust network that has, outside of Mississippi, a great deal of expertise and knowledge in building community land trusts. And so that is still a work in progress for us, yeah. But definitely the relationship with the local universities is important. We've been able to talk with JSU around the urban development, but then also we've had some stuff with the urban farming through with Alcorn State. And so I think the universities, even though a lot of times there's a tension and the challenge around them also supporting gentrification or being a kind of like default part of it, but there's still really good opportunities to build with the students on campus and the different departments to help support with the research and stuff that we've needed in a lot of ways.
And we've also maintained a strong relationship with some of the private institutions, the private institutions such as Tougaloo College, which is a historically Black institution that has always been considered a safe haven in the South, and so and have been less engaged in gentrification, I would say. Yeah. And so we still maintain a really strong relationship with them, and have began conversations with them again around maker spaces as they're beginning to really figure out how they can begin to be a part of that process of maker spaces at Tougaloo. And then one of the things that I'm hoping we'll be able to do is also some of the community colleges are now really beginning to create opportunities for are starting to research and invest in fabrication lab understanding. And so like Hines Community College has created like some systems there, some classes there. And so we can hopefully increase our partnerships with some of those institutions.
Yeah, that's great. So one last question before we move into hearing a little bit about how folks can support. So Rukia, you started to get into sort of foreshadowing what might be possible if you all win or when you all win the next election. And so one of the questions that came in was, what is the coordination between making solidarity economy projects sustainable and gaining political power? Did the short administration of Mayor Lumumba or subsequent administrations provide support for solidarity economy efforts? So what's the connection between the two? What existed in the 7-month period when Mayor Lumumba was in place, when your father was there as mayor? What do you think, in addition to what you already mentioned around being able to gain vacant properties to create free housing, what else do you think is possible when you all win?
Well, I'll start, but I think, Saki probably has a lot to add to this. When my father first was elected, Cooperation Jackson didn't exist. We were attempting to actually do the work that Cooperation Jackson is doing now. We were trying to use the administration in that way to do that work. And so we had members of the administration that were solely dedicated to developing a plan for, a solidarity economy in Jackson, including the development of the cooperatives that you've seen and opportunities for people to create cooperatives. So that was in the makes. It was in the making. And so his untimely death, jump-started Kali and Saki to really say, well, we still got to continue this work. We're going to continue it, and this is how, right? And so that's how Cooperation Jackson was birthed. In terms of support after he passed, we had a lot of national support, tremendous amount of national support, I would say, and international support. But in terms of the local government here, there was no support. It was looked at, sadly to say, the new administration did not even understand the concepts that we were presenting, and completely set us aside as one comment said, as those what they say, barefoot slave people, you know, who are just trying to be in the fields, right? And so there was a lack of support.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was trying to go and look at some of the conversation on the chat, so I kind of had one ear and heard Rukia say, "Oh, Saki probably has a lot to add for this," but then also seeing Ricardo. Hi, Ricardo. And Ricardo Nunez, I think that's you. Question around being able to have people be engaged, like how are members of the community being engaged and how people staying engaged.
Well, it was
but
Saki,
I will say,
Saki.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, it was the other question. It was around, was there support from the government?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
sorry.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm being transparent. If you see my eyes going here and then coming to here. So yes, around the opportunity, the potential opportunity coming up, and I think, you know, clearly we can say what the differences would be, having gone from being in a position to have a grassroots-based, you know, collaboration and really the bottom-up development and approach to development from the community in collaboration with you know, the municipality, right? And that has not been the case since then. Although we did see a nice video ad that incorporated the like literal language that was being used by the city, although we were being treated hostilely. And so, you know, the real opportunity, I think I was trying to speak to this earlier, is that, you know, most of us, a lot of us are in spaces where we have to fight. We have to be constantly pushing for the kind of progressive policies, the kind of policies that we want to see in place, that, I mean, that just to protect ourselves, let alone a policy being put forward that can move, you know, move in the direction of creating alternatives that we're, like what we're talking about. And so, you know, we are here as a community-based institution, organization, in order to have that bottom-up process. A favorable administration allows for there to be a collaboration between that community-based process and the city, and in partnership, and provides a lot of opportunities for the kind of scale that you could see with cooperatives when you have a partner like the city. And the city of Jackson is one of the 3 major employers here in Jackson. And so, you know, you think about being able to go from a co-op of 10 worker owners to having a city contract for waste management and kick out the waste management, the company, who is basically just like extracting resources, has basically has a non-existent recycling program. It's really pitiful, to being able to have a worker-run waste management company that's doing composting, that's doing recycling, that's doing waste management, and providing, you know, living wages, jobs, and the workers are owners on a scale of like hundreds. And so that's what's really exciting about being able to, to have the kind of relationships and the kind of thinking and visioning that's happening within our organizations.
Thank you both. So folks know that this goes to 9:30. We are quickly running out of time. I want to be able to tie Ricardo's question into really rounding out the open-ended question period. So one, appreciation for folks who offered their comments and their questions in the chat box. The next section is really helping us understand how folks on the call can support movement building and municipal power building efforts that are happening in Jackson. And I think Ricardo's question is well tied to that, in that I would imagine that enormous amount an enormous amount of the work that you all do is really working to keep the surrounding community engaged. And so perhaps there are things that people can do that support you in that engagement endeavor. So sort of tying his question around community engagement into what you all would ask or say are a few things that folks on the call could do to support this kind of work in Jackson.
So you want me to start? So in terms of engaging folks right now, one of my biggest roles right now is really helping around our campaign to elect my brother Sacajawea Lumumba as mayor. So really encouraging people to visit the website, lumumbaformayor.com, and determine how you might be able to become a part of this. One of the things we do is that we're a real grassroots campaign. That means we go door to door knocking. That means we're making personal telephone calls. We're not paying people. This is all volunteer run. We're a poor people's campaign. And so having resources and having bodies down here to help us do that is great, to engage as many people as possible. The other thing is really, supporting with resources outside of just people. It costs money to do this work. Unfortunately, we don't have our makerspace yet where we can make our own signs and all of that type of thing. So we need financial resources and support to help us have a strong presence and reach as many of our people as possible, engage them in the process.
Yeah, so I think I'll try to connect the two. I mean, I think that what I think I remember seeing was like, it's a challenge to engage people in something that before they can actually see it, right? And then in some of what you can see, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's great, that's nice. You have collard greens that are huge and kale. And a conversation that we have that's really real and like intergenerational is this, is like a disconnect and really like a distancing from the land because of slavery and because of sharecropping. And so it's an ongoing challenge and ongoing conversations and building with people around something that may not have anything to do with the fact that we're in a food desert. It may not have anything to do with the fact that you have to drive, get in your car and drive if you have a car to be able to have access to fresh produce. And being able to engage in conversations around one thing and then be able to tie it back into how it's connected with something else, right? So we do and connect and talk about sustainability and climate justice and some of these things just as much as economic democracy and like a worker cooperative. Like we're constantly talking about how do we like Nat is over here, like, what's the language that we use? Like, how do we make this real? How do we break this down? How do we talk about it in a way that is, speaks to people? And early on when we were first starting to kind of do a series leading towards the Jackson Rising conference, before we even realized that we would be launching Cooperation Jackson, because we would be having a window, like narrow, that opening, narrowing, like we realized that people's lived experience means that they get it. Being able to see and visualize like what it looks like is still a challenge though, right? And so I think that's a constant, challenge and is something that we really take seriously, especially as Rukia mentioned in the very beginning. Like Rukia, I wouldn't have called Rukia a transplant, but she wasn't born here, but she lived here for so much of her life that I think of her as like, being from Jackson, living here and coming back home. But in a lot of ways, like Jackson, Mississippi in the South, it's like, are you born and raised here, right? And so as transplants, how do we have conversations with people in the neighborhood that, you know, that I live with, but clearly, you know, you hear me talk, I'm not from, like, where are you from? Why are you here? Why'd you move to Jackson? You lived in New York, what? And so just the day-to-day kind of like being able to engage with people and know the ebbs and flows of like folks who may come and knowing that the moment that you have this one time could be planting a seed for later down the line, even if you don't necessarily see them engaged constantly, right? I think that a lot of us who are on the call know that that's the reality of organizing and organizing in our communities that have real needs that we're not always able to meet, right? And even though we're talking about being able to do that and do that together in the long term. One of the things that isn't up here in terms of ways to support is that we're really interested and we've been able to really benefit from skill shares. And so one of the reasons why, and we running out of time, we haven't gotten to hear from you all, but one of the reasons why we put that question out there is like, what are you doing already that demonstrates this, or in their different places, or if you haven't, how do you see this being able to apply? Is because it's a constant engagement of what's working, what's not working, how do we adjust, how do we help each other? So we recently had a skill share with the Black Dirt Collective, and they came and they were here for a week, and our Freedom Farms crew felt like it was just the most exciting thing that happened in like the last 2 years. And so us being able to go to places and share kind of like growing things that we're learning, and folks being able to come here is really important. You know, we've been able to be blessed. We were in Barcelona and got a chance to hit up all, you know, everything from like the cooperatives to the municipality to the Fab Lab makerspace. And so there's such a wealth of knowledge that exists within our communities that we want to, you know, either virtually or in person, think about how we're sharing these skills, how we're sharing these experiences, how we're learning together, and being able to be connected and strengthening our movement so that they're connected and we're large and we grow.
Mm-hmm. So thank you both. We are clearly going to have to schedule a sequel to this episode of the Renter Nation webinar series. I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for getting on this webinar, for sharing your strategies, for sharing all of those beautiful images, for sharing what clearly is your joy. I mean, Rukia, we couldn't see you, but you can hear it through the phone, the joy that you have around this experiment, around this growth, around these wins. And we are really grateful to have been able to be pulled in for a glimpse of it and to be able to support it moving forward as it continues to grow and gain momentum. Before we lose folks, I want to be able to hand this over to Tony Romano, right, to the city's organizing director in Atlanta, who's going to cover some of the next steps and the next Renter Nation webinar series. Take it away, Tony.
Hey.
Take it away, Tony.
Oh, sorry about that. Tony has drafted Malcolm to do this because we're wonderfully in the same house. This doesn't happen very often. So this was the first episode of the Renter Nation series, and we're deeply grateful to the folks in Jackson. The next episode is coming up on April 20th, which is going to feature Robbie Clark from Casa Justa Just Cause, Brandon King, who's also with Cooperation Jackson, and Ashley Woodard Henderson from the Highlander Institute. And the discussion is going to be on Black liberation, racial justice, and the struggle against gentrification, and really linking and going deep into the roots of gentrification and the way that gentrification and neoliberal development have historically impacted disenfranchised Black communities, and the need for struggles against gentrification to center and lift up and be led by struggles for Black liberation and broader racial justice. And racial justice needs to be a central part of that work. So we really encourage you all to join us for the rest of this series as well. You can check out the episodes on our website at homesforall.org/RN2017. You can also register for all of those episodes now. And again, we are going to be having interpretation on all of those and we're going to be getting that information out shortly. So again, apologize for tonight not having that. And lastly, we just want to let you all know that if you're interested in joining Homes for All and being part of these experiments to build regional power, build renter power with a broader lens around community control of land and repurposing land and housing for people's needs, and building broader power towards a transition to an economy for the people and planet, we invite you to. If you go to the next slide, Mark, you can take the pledge for Homes for All at homesforall.org/pledge. So one last, lots and lots of love to the wonderful Rochelle, Saki, and Rukia. If we could, everybody unmute yourself, give them a lot of love, a lot of applause, a lot of chants, declarations of we got you, we got your back. Get in touch with Rukia and Saki if you're interested in
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody.
Way to go, Malcolm.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Malcolm and Tony.
Rukia.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Free the land.
Go get him, Rachel.
Wake up, you.
Appreciate y'all.
Okay, yeah.
Someone's been dying.